This is the Toshiba Satellite A65-S126, a consumer laptop from 2004 that would have retailed for $1,000. The A-series line mostly constituted of desktop replacement laptops due to how big they were, and that's what this computer is. This computer is also a pretty weird one. I bought it on eBay for 20 bucks because I was just looking for something interesting and I saw this computer. It had a 2.8 GHz Intel Celeron processor, 256 megs of RAM, a 60 gig hard drive, a DVD-ROM CDRW combo drive, some kind of ATI graphics, and it originally would have shipped with Windows XP. I was mostly intrigued by this thing because it had a desktop Celeron processor, something you don't see every day in a laptop. Besides, I had my wisdom teeth taken out at this time and I was looking for some other way to inflict pain on myself. It's been about a year since I got this computer and it's been interesting, to say the least. I haven't been able to find a whole lot of information about this computer. I haven't really been able to find a whole lot of videos or reviews from back in the day, except for one CNET review, which didn't exactly rate it all that well. So I can't imagine that this was a super popular computer when it was new. It is also worth mentioning that there were other models of the Satellite A65, including ones that were better than this one. This was probably one of the oldest and lowest end ones that you could have bought in their lineup. You're probably wondering why a desktop Celeron processor and not a Celeron or Pentium M, and it's probably because Toshiba also sold models of this exact same laptop with a mobile Pentium 4, which back in those days was a desktop chip, and rather than re-engineering the board, they just used the desktop Celeron processor in the cheap ones, probably to save time and money, which I guess works. Though all of this hardware constitutes a package that is fairly underwhelming, to be honest. But we'll get back to that in a little bit. Let's take a look at the exterior of this thing. As far as ports on this laptop go, on the front we have 5 status indicators for AC status, power on, battery status, the hard drive LED, which also doubles as a CD drive LED, and the Wi-Fi LED, as well as the display latch for the computer, and built-in infrared. On the right side of the laptop we have more ventilation, the spot for the hard drive, a volume control, which is actually fairly nice, though typical for Toshiba laptops from this time, a headphone and microphone jack, a wireless switch, and a USB 2.0 port, which on this one has problems, doesn't really work that well. On the back of the laptop we have a Kensington lock slot, the giant cooling vent, which is fairly typical for a laptop with a desktop processor, an S-video port, even more ventilation, a dial-up modem, 10100 Ethernet, 2 USB ports, the DC-19 power plug, a VGA, and parallel ports with the screws, which is fairly nice to be honest, and a blanking port for probably what would have been a mini FireWire port. On the left side of the laptop we have a Type 2 PC card slot with the blank still in it, but the eject mechanism is gone, so I don't know how useful this is. Even more ventilation above that, and the DVD-ROM CD writer combo drive, which, as you might be able to tell, has seen better days. The lid of the laptop is in this pretty nice blue color, which I gotta say, I actually like it when PC manufacturers do stuff like this. There was no reason they had to do it this way. The rest of this laptop is black and silver. They could have easily just gone with a silver lid, but instead, they made it blue, and to be honest, I like it. On the palm rest of the laptop, we have the power button with the LED ring, the satellite logo, the included keyboard, which is okay, it's not really amazing. Worth mentioning, this isn't the original keyboard of this computer. The original one was missing a couple keys and was bent, and rather trying to fix it, I had this old one out of an older Satellite, and it turns out it was a drop-in replacement. The only difference is the Windows logo is the older Windows 9X one, but who cares really. It also came out of a really gross laptop, and while I did my best, I clearly didn't do that good of a job at cleaning it, but oh well. We also have the built-in trackpad, pretty small but average for the time, and the buttons, and hopefully you might be able to notice that this one was used so much that the paint has actually worn down, which is kind of funny. We also have the Intel Celeron sticker, the Graphics by ATI sticker, the Super G Atheros sticker for the Wi-Fi, the Windows XP sticker, and the SRS sound sticker. And we have 2 relatively mediocre speakers on the palm rest. And yes, if you couldn't already tell, this palm rest is painted plastic, as by the paint that is rubbed off this computer from the original owner using it that much. For the display, we have a 15-inch 1024 by 768 display, a fairly average resolution for the time. It wasn't bad, it just kind of wasn't really good. It's a matte display though, and you can see it's in pretty good condition except for one pretty big scratch on the screen, which I just can't do anything about. We also have the latch for the display, which, as you can see, one of the latches has snapped off this computer, meaning it doesn't really close that well. But that's what you would expect for a beat-up laptop, I guess. On the bottom of the laptop, as you can see, we're missing quite a few things. First of all, the battery, which probably is a good thing because from what I can gather, the battery on this thing was incredibly mediocre, lasting about 2 hours. It's also missing all the covers for the RAM, Wi-Fi, and the modem. It also has a 256 meg stick of RAM underneath that. It's a single DIMM, and we'll get into that later. Probably the modem, I think, and the Wi-Fi G slot, which this computer does have a card in it, though I had to replace it because the original one was not here, so this is one manufactured by Intel. If you might already be able to tell, somebody clearly was trying to go through this to look for the hard drive, which is probably why all the covers and all the drives were beat up. Which is why it's pretty funny that the one thing that was in this computer is the hard drive. This is a 60 gig drive manufactured by Toshiba themselves. It's a 4200 RPM drive. It's fairly mediocre, like some of the other things in this laptop, but it's there, it works, I guess. There's also various stickers around the computer, the Toshiba information sticker, and the Windows XP Home Edition COA. And obviously, as you can tell by that sticker, this thing does require a lot of power, thanks to that processor. And it also needs a fairly hefty cooling fan, as you can see next to it. To get into the BIOS on this computer, it's kind of a weird situation. You have to press the escape key first, then press the F1 key. Not sure why you couldn't just do that to begin with. Anyway, here's the BIOS on this computer. I think it's actually Toshiba's own thing, or at least I can't seem to find a manufacturer anywhere for this. So here we are. First of all, we can see the memory, which was reported as 448 megs. But if you were paying attention earlier, you might notice that I said it only had 256 megs of RAM underneath that. That's because this computer actually came with 256 megs of RAM built in with an extra DIMM that you could populate. Toshiba claims that this computer has an internal DIMM, but I dismantled this entire computer when I repasted the processor, and I've yet to find anywhere where there actually is a DIMM. So either they're lying and it's soldered, or it's so well hidden that it's still worth complaining about. Either way, it's pretty unfortunate because it means that this computer has a very hard time with RAM upgrades because the RAM that comes with this computer is so mediocre. It's DDR266 MHz RAM. So the most I've been able to do in this computer has been 512 megabytes, since this is the one stick of RAM that I can even get to work in this computer. And even then, I'm having trouble getting it working. This is a situation where I actually hope this one just has a bad RAM slot or something, because if that's truly how this computer is, then frankly, that's incredibly poor from Toshiba. Anyways, there aren't really a whole lot of notable options in this computer. You can change various performance settings, peripheral settings. You can apparently set the LCD display to be stretched or not, which I'm going to leave it set that way because I think it just looks better. Otherwise, there really aren't a whole lot of other changes in this BIOS that are interesting. Though I will say its theme is relatively easy on the eyes, and some of the keys you use to interact with it are pretty interesting. For example, instead of pressing a function key or actually manually clicking reset values, you can press the home key, which will just set the default values automatically. And when you're done, instead of pressing save, change, and exit, you just hit the end key, which honestly is pretty clever. Now, just like the BIOS on this computer, the boot menu is also interesting. If you press F12, you see these symbols underneath the Toshiba logo. Turns out that's actually the boot menu. You just select the symbol and then you can boot to that. Kind of cool, actually. It's a bit different from just selecting a menu that lists a bunch of devices. Anyways, of course this computer is running Windows XP, because that's just what everything ran. Specifically Windows XP Home Edition Service Pack 1, since this computer was manufactured a couple months too late to probably have Service Pack 2. This is the original install of Windows that would have shipped with this computer. What's actually pretty interesting is that out of the box, the default Windows theme is actually set to the silver theme, which I've never seen before on an OEM machine, but I gotta say, I think it makes a lot of sense for this. I mean, the rest of the laptop, other than the lid, is silver, so it just makes sense. Otherwise, yeah, this is the original Windows install. I found it in the Internet Archive if you're curious. Here's a look at some of the hardware in this machine. Pretty standard stuff. This computer uses an ATI chipset of some kind, in case you were wondering, which also explains the ATI Mobility Radeon 7000 IGP graphics setup, which is far from ideal on this computer. It was a pretty mediocre chip when it was new. Sadly, not an uncommon solution back in the day. Lots of laptops had graphics chips like this, but it still wasn't really great. Here's a look at the system resource usage. Obviously, it goes without saying that upgrading the RAM seriously helped on its own with the performance of this computer. 192 megs of RAM when this computer was new was not good. And yes, I'm calling it 192 megs of RAM because that's basically what it is. Now it's time to go through all the programs on this computer because there is a lot of stuff that came preloaded with this thing. First of all, AOL 9, which is fairly typical for the time since it has a modem. It also has a trial of a bunch of ArcSoft photo-related software, including Photo Impression 5, something I don't really have a use for. It also has AT&T WorldNet, some kind of DVD RAM driver, Intervideo WinDVD 5 for Toshiba, that's always good since it does have that DVD drive, some kind of Java thing, because of course, a copy of Microsoft Office Standard 2003, which I thought was a trial, but at least if it was, then it's expired and requires a product key that I don't have, so that's not really all that useful. Fortunately, this computer also comes with a copy of Microsoft Works 7, so I don't need to worry about Office not working, because you can just use this. It also has Napster. This program called Notebook Maximizer, which honestly I thought was a virus at first, but it's actually this Toshiba program, which is pretty interesting. It tells you a bunch of information about your computer, as well as the real-time CPU activity, how your RAM is doing, how much storage you're using, your battery percentage, which by the way, I'm better than all of you, as well as various links to different support things you may want to access, and links to various accessories that you might want to use on your computer. Honestly, not really a bad program. I think for somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about their computer, it might not be a bad thing to have. It also has a copy of Quicken 2004. A copy of QuickTime Player 6.3, similar to that eMachine's computer I did a video on. Real Player, because, of course. Sonic DLA, some kind of drive letter access thing, and Record Now, since it has that CDRW capability, specifically version 7 Basic for Toshiba. Ooh, fancy. It also has a ton of various accessories for Toshiba network stuff, the speech system, which I don't even know what that is, and a ton of utilities, including the Toshiba console, where you can view all of these things. Some laptops have a physical button to open this program, but this doesn't have one. And there's also PC diagnostics, but they're kind of weird because they open an Internet Explorer, which as you can see in IE8, since this has been fully updated, really doesn't like this too much, which is a bit funny. We also have this Toshiba software upgrades program, which, if I had to guess, is probably a way to update programs on your computer that would have shipped with it. I don't know, it doesn't work. We also have Adobe Acrobat 5, which I find a bit of a weird decision since Acrobat 6 was out at this time, but okay. And a way to register with Toshiba, except it's not really working that well. Like, for some reason, the Toshiba name is not there, it's just a blank. And some of the text is just gone. But apparently if you register, you can get a discount coupon. But that expired 20 years ago. We also have a buy at Toshiba Direct shortcut in the start menu, which allows you to buy various accessories, warranty upgrades, and you can even download free software. And we also have the Toshiba Help and Support Center, which links you back to various Toshiba support things. So yeah, there is quite a lot of stuff that comes with this computer. It wouldn't normally be that big of a deal, but given that this computer has so little RAM, definitely not that great. As far as other hardware capabilities of this computer, here's a test of those speakers. I do want to disclose that if you couldn't already tell, my camera's internal microphone is incredibly mediocre, but even still, the speakers on this thing just really suck. Unless you put your ear maybe right up to them, they don't sound good at all. They don't have any clarity, any bass, none of that. I mean, I guess you can kind of expect that for a cheaper laptop, but still, they're really not good at all. It also has this SRS XT control panel plugin, but honestly, none of these options really seem to change the audio at all. If anything, they just make the audio sound worse. It's kind of a shame because normally even cheap Toshiba laptops usually have pretty good speakers, but it doesn't appear to be the case with this one. You're probably also wondering about gaming capabilities of this computer. No, you're probably not. If you remember earlier, I said this computer has a ATI Mobility Radeon 7000 IGP for graphics. Again, probably because of the ATI chipset, but it wasn't an uncommon graphics setup for laptops of this time, but it doesn't mean that it's good. In fact, it's actually really horrible. This GPU setup already was old when this computer came out, being introduced in 2003, and this graphics card is really based on RAID 6, which came out in 2001, meaning this GPU can do basically about DirectX 7, and that's about it. Of course, DirectX 9 software, but the point is, for any kind of intense games at all, this computer just can't do it. It wasn't meant to do that. Even basic things like Bejeweled struggle on this computer at times, which is honestly kind of impressive. Speaking of mediocre, the DVD drive on this thing. You may be surprised by this, but the DVD drive actually does still work, despite it being all smashed up. It's just that there's no eject button, so it has to be ejected in software, which can be kind of annoying. It also needs a bit of assistance to be able to open. By the way, if you put the recovery DVD into this computer, you can use it to reinstall various applications and drivers, or you can initiate a system recovery from this disk, which honestly is pretty nice. Anyways, the DVD drive in this computer, as I mentioned, is pretty awful. It can do about 4x speeds for DVDs and 24x for CDs. What's weird is Toshiba themselves say 15x on the bottom of the computer, which I guess means the screen size, because I don't know why else it would say 15x if neither of those numbers match up. But even still, kind of a really poor way to do that, since, well, that could be easily confused for the drive speed. But yes, the DVD drive in this computer really isn't any good. The only reason I've left it in here is because, well, it actually works, since I don't have very many optical drives from this day that actually work. I haven't actually tried watching a DVD on this computer, but I actually made a small sample movie in Windows Movie Maker just to test this thing's video playback. I can't imagine this computer would have been that amazing watching a DVD on it. And even if it was, I can't imagine the battery on this thing would have been that great for that either. The hard drive on this computer also isn't great. I think you're noticing a theme by now. A lot of the major components in this computer, truthfully, are just no good. This is a Toshiba 60 gig 4200 RPM drive, as I mentioned before. It does still work, but yeah, this is just not quick, and especially this hard drive is really not good when this computer is running out of RAM and it needs to access the page file. The hard drive itself is dying, but I guess there's a pretty good reason for that, because as you can tell by the power on hours, this thing has been used for a very long time. If I had to guess, this computer probably was left on all the time because it was that slow, which probably explains why this thing has so many hours on it. And I'm sure you're probably wondering about web browsing on this machine. Again, no, you're probably not, because you can't really do it with any modern browser at all. It's not possible. This is Firefox 52 from 2016. I haven't even installed Supermium on this computer because there is no point. You're not doing internet browsing on this computer these days. I mean, even updating Windows through the Windows Update website was a struggle with this computer. It was already running out of RAM with that. At the very least, this computer would need more RAM in order to be able to do it, which, like I said earlier, is a pretty tough task on this computer. And that really kind of goes for a lot of things on Windows on this thing. Really, other than basic things, maybe like Word documents, this computer really just can't do a whole lot on Windows. And just in general, not just Windows XP, but even older versions of Windows like 98 and 2000 are kind of just the same. This computer just, all of the components in it are just not good enough for Windows practically. It's just a really awful experience. In fact, I couldn't even get Specky to work on this computer. I had to install SpeedFan on it to be able to view the temperatures on this thing. The temperatures of this thing idling aren't too bad. It does about 50 degrees, but it's a desktop processor, and the fact it's a Celeron really isn't going to save you in that regard. This thing can get pretty hot at times. Now, I will admit, because Windows was so bad, I ended up installing an old version of Ubuntu on this thing alongside Windows. I'm pretty sure there's at least one mega Linux fanboy watching this that's probably just died inside the moment they've heard the word Ubuntu, but to be honest, I was literally just going for anything that would work on this computer. So I installed a really old version, Ubuntu 6.06 from 2006. I just ended up making a small partition alongside the Windows partition in order to make this work. Are there newer distros that might work on this? Probably. Do I care? No. Also, by the way, something interesting is I noticed that according to Ubuntu, this DVD drive can't do DVD RAM, which is kind of funny that the other Windows installs seem to think it could do DVD RAM. Obviously, because this version of Ubuntu is so old, a lot of the built-in programs on this are also ancient, but it is a similar situation. You can do basic things with this computer, if that's your interest. That being said, Linux support on this computer really isn't amazing. One of the biggest problems I'm having with this computer is trying to get the internet working. The Wi-Fi doesn't work, it's not compatible, and the Ethernet really doesn't work that well either. It kind of says that it works, but it doesn't really work that well. Usually it just never ends up sending any packets, except for apparently when I recorded this video. I hadn't even been able to update this computer with all the latest updates from back in the day, even though I changed all the files to make that work, but apparently the internet just decided to start working the one time I wanted to record this video. So here you go. Here's internet browsing on this machine, so you can do it, but as I mentioned earlier, you're not going to be able to do that with a modern browser, and even then, you're not going to be able to browse a whole lot with Firefox version 1.5 from 2006. Now, I did run all the updates on this to get this as up to date as possible, just to try and update some of the software on this machine, since it just didn't seem to work before. This also gives us an opportunity to look at some of the screensavers on this thing, because it took so long to do the updates, which are not good. I kind of didn't know what I expected, to be honest, but I'm a bit impressed that even built-in screensavers to this operating system are lagging pretty horribly on this computer. I imagine some of this is probably because this operating system just really does not support this GPU well at all. There is a lot of graphical corruption throughout the operating system, but I mean, part of this is also just that this computer's graphics card really sucks that bad. Honestly impressive, to be honest, how just mediocre the graphics in this computer truly are. Especially because this operating system was meant for a computer like this. Ubuntu 6 was from 2006. This computer was about a year and a half old. Arguably a typical computer you may expect to run this OS on, but it just doesn't support it that well at all. I would be inclined to mess around with maybe era-appropriate Linux. You're not going to be running any modern operating system on this anyway. But I don't know. This computer just doesn't seem to support it at all. At least, of course, its memory usage, even while doing something, is dramatically better than what it was on Windows. Though even still, with the original 192 megs of RAM usable to this computer, would have been a struggle. And even when it's not the RAM, it's the CPU. Because that's just kind of how this computer is. When it's not one component, it's another component. You could probably upgrade this computer. You could upgrade this to a Pentium 4 because they sold other models with a Pentium 4, and you could probably put a faster hard drive in it. But even if you were to do some of those things, there's other things you just can't do anything about. You can't do a whole lot about the RAM, especially if half of it truly is soldered to this system. You could maybe get like a gig working, but depending on what you're doing, that's still not great. And you're still not going to be able to do anything about the relatively mediocre graphics this thing has. Now, I've been mostly being negative about this computer for most of this video, so it is worth mentioning there are some positives about it. First of all, it does have Wi-Fi, which for 2004 is pretty good to have. Not all computers had that back in the day, so that is a fairly good selling point. It also does have a DVD drive if you wanted to watch DVDs or something like that. Again, not everything had that back in the day. It does have a decent capacity hard drive, even if it's not fast. And most of the things you touch and interact with on the computer aren't too bad. The construction of it is pretty decent. The keyboard and touchpad are also, while they're not amazing, they get the job done, and they are pretty good, to be honest, especially the trackpad, even if it is pretty small. The display on this computer has aged pretty well on this one too. Despite having this many hours on it, the backlight is still pretty good on this computer. It's pretty even, other than like a couple minutes when the computer's been off for a very long time. Sometimes the backlight's a bit weird, but the display on this computer does get decently bright, and it has aged pretty well on this one, even if the resolution isn't too amazing. But not all those things are going to be enough really to make it a decent product. The reality is, a lot of the core hardware components of this computer, the processor, the RAM, the hard drive, and the graphics, are pretty awful on this computer. From the one CNET review I can find on this computer, it didn't exactly do that well performance-wise compared to other offerings of the time. And given the mediocre battery life, this computer wasn't exactly rated very positively. And I kinda had to agree, to be honest. It's just a strange laptop with some strange decisions. I may even do a follow-up on this computer trying to upgrade it as much as I can to try and make it decent, because I do think there is potential in this computer to make it a pretty decent machine. But obviously, as it stands today, if you're looking for a Windows XP laptop or something to run an old operating system, well, of course, there's better options. And even then, trying to find one of these has been pretty tough on eBay. I actually was considering finding some of the spare parts that I'm missing, like those covers and a battery and a proper optical drive and other things like that, but I just really haven't been able to find another one of these or any of the parts that are cheap at all. At least to make it worth justifying the cost, considering I only paid $20 for this computer. So again, as I mentioned earlier, I can't imagine this product was very popular or very well liked, and to be honest, I kind of have to agree.